I'm Brian from RC Workboat Haven. Welcome to part 5 of the Gaff Cutter build series. In part 5, we're going to balance this rig. We're going to find the center of lateral resistance. We're going to find the center of the sail area. We're going to fabricate our spars and our deck fittings. We're going to make patterns for sails. We'll be bringing the boat up to the stage that you see here. A lot of work to do. Hope you enjoy the video. Thanks for watching. So now we're at the point where we have 2 coats of varathane all over the painted surfaces, and I can start positioning deck fixtures so that we can fix the bowsprit and the mast in position. Now the original plan shows the bowsprit projecting forward of the stem by about 16 inches. That could be too long, but I have to bear in mind that I may require something that projects out that far. So I'm making the bowsprit adjustable fore and aft until I can fix it in the correct position. The mast will not be longer than 34 inches and it will be mounted on the deck. So this is the stock that I'll be using for the bowsprit, and I'm using it to align the 2 fixtures. The one furthest forward has a 5/8 hole drilled in it, and it's a number of pieces of bamboo that are all glued together to make a pretty tough fixture here. This will go just in front of the forward hatch, and the bowsprit will be able to slide through it. Between the 2 hatches, I've made another fixture here. It's a mast step, or you might call it a tabernacle. It's made of bamboo. It's about 3/8 of an inch thick stock, and it's all wood glued together. So I'm going to use the uncut piece here for the bowsprit and align these 2 pieces and fix them to the deck. And I'll make sure that the stock is well aligned here on the center line. So now the 5/8 bowsprit stock is in position, and I've got my 2 fixtures located in the right spot. I'm just using a low power battery drill here, and I'm marking the 2 after holes. So now I'll remove the stock and the fixtures and drill those 4 holes first. Now up forward here, I used my longest 3mm bolts, and they just protrude enough through that reinforcement so I can put a nut on. So I'll drill the other 2 holes here. So here are the 2 fixtures fastened down. I've got 3mm nuts and bolts, about 3/4 of an inch long, up forward. Aft I've got 632 nuts and bolts, 1 inch long. They're in here good and solid. So here you can see that I can slide the bowsprit back and forth, possibly cut it off later in the build. So I'm going to leave it about here. Looks like about 2 inches. So on the overhang, I'm measuring out 16 inches. I'll go 17 just for safe measure. Mark it and cut it off. So here's the bowsprit set into position on the right angle. It won't move right or left. It will move up and down until it's pinned right here. The mast is going to be a 3/4 inch dowel. I believe this is birch. It's very stiff wood. Now in order to transport this boat in the car and just to make it easier to carry, I want to be able to de-rig the whole model. So I want the bowsprit to come out and then be relocated here on the deck, and I want the mast to fit within the overall length of the deck. All the sails folded up like this. So the length here on deck is approximately 34 inches. I'm going to cut the mast off at 34 inches, and that's the maximum length. The mast step will have a removable pin. And I want the mast also to be able to swing forward and aft without catching on anything. So I put a 1/16 inch spacer down at the bottom, and I'm resting the bottom of the mast up against the spacer, and I'll mark it here, and I'll drill my hole, which is about 1/8 of an inch. And I'll carefully drill a hole right here all the way through the mast. I put a 1/8 by 2 inch steel cotter pin through the mast step. And now the mast will swing up and swing forward. At the top of the mast, I like to have a little section of white here, like a cap. I think it looks better. And then I'll start my rigging just below that. And I'll do the same at the end of the bowsprit. I think the spars look better when there's a little bit of a white tip at the ends and so on. It just seems to look more traditional and more balanced. So what I'll do is I'll take about 1 inch, maybe 1.25 inches, and I'll file a taper on it, and I'll be painting that white later on. And here's the taper I put in the top of the mast. It's about 1.5 inches long. And the taper in the bowsprit is about 1 inch long. I drilled a 1/8 hole through these two posts and put in a 1/8 inch cotter pin. So now my bowsprit is held in position in every direction, including fore and aft. I've left it here at about 15 inches total length. Now I know where my vertical top surface is on the bowsprit. I'm using standard steel screw eyes from the hardware store. I drilled a 1.5 millimeter pilot hole. So here's a look at the rig up top. Here's an eye going forward, and then an eye port and starboard for 2 side stays. I've just tied the side stays onto the scupper opening here on the port and starboard. Forward, I've added an eye right here on top, and that will be for the inner jib. So at this point, we have the rig up. So now we've got the basic profile, and we can change anything we want. We can relocate any of these eyes, but at least now there's a start. I'll be using a 1/2 inch dowel for the boom and the gaff. I'm going to cut the boom off at 21 inches. I've rounded the end of the boom to paint white later. I've put an eye in to hold the leech of the sail. I've put an eye in the end of the boom and another eye about 2¼ inches up from the bottom of the mast. The boom will also fold up against the mast, and hopefully it will be able to furl the sails like this. Now I want the gaff at about a 30-degree angle, and when it's folded up this way, I don't want it to be any higher than the top of the mast. So that is the rough position that I propose. At the bottom of the gaff here, I have an eye going into the mast and another eye through it into the end of the gaff dowel. Up top, I have rounded the end off that I'll paint white later. I have another eye here and here, and this will support the gaff in proper alignment in relation to the mast, which is about 30 degrees. In order to easily calculate the area of the mainsail, I've put a temporary line here from this point down to the heel of the sail, and that divides the mainsail up into two triangles. So using the formula 1/2 the base times the height, I can get the square footage of this mainsail. So I've measured the rig as it stands at this point in inches, and I've measured eye to eye. So the gaff is 14 inches, the leech is 28 inches, the boom is 20 inches, and the luff is 15 inches. The temporary diagonal line was 22 inches. So I'm calling the top section triangle A and the bottom section triangle B. And I have the height of A at 11 inches and the height of B at 13.5 inches. So area equals the base divided by 2 times the height. So A is 28 divided by 2 times 11 equals 154 square inches. B is 22 divided by 2 times 13.5 inches in height. That gives us 148.5. So they're fairly evenly sized as triangles. They're almost equal, a total of 303 square inches. Now the fore triangle will be divided up into two separate jibs, and there will be spaces between the jibs. But as it stands now, if this was all one large jib, comes to about 350 square inches. So the forward section with the bowsprit in this position has a bit more area than the mainsail. So now we have to bring in one more factor, and that is the center of lateral resistance. Now the underside of the boat has a certain point in it when it's balanced from the side. We're not taking into account the beam or anything. Just think of it as a shadow. Somewhere in here there is a swivel point where the boat will turn on a center. So out of heavy paper, I've made a profile of the underwater surface. And it's all the same thickness, so the weight was able to balance at this point here on a pin. And it's also balanced in this direction. I believe that this point right here is the center of lateral resistance for all practical purposes. So on the internet, there's a lot of information about the center of the sail area and the center of the lateral resistance. But generally, the sail area center should be forward of the CLR by anywhere from 3% to 17%. Now, with radio control, I'm not concerned about the feel of the tiller. I just want to make sure that there is a nice sound principle at work here. So now, according to this guide, the center of the sail area should be approximately here. That's a good place to start. And by the way, that is just about where the mast is located. So as I go ahead now and try to figure out how to balance the rig up forward, I'm going to use that as my end target for the center of the sail area. Now, using heavy white paper, I'm going to cut out the basic profile of the mainsail. So here's our rough cut mainsail. It may have to be trimmed. The boom could be too high on the stern end of it, but it gives us something to work with at this point to calculate balance. So now I'll rough cut the two jibs and see what we get. And here's a rough layout of the rig so far. Now on the jibs, I've added jib booms here. They're going to be loose-footed. The mainsail will also be loose-footed. Now on these forward sails, if you take half of each side and make a mark, and then go from a corner to that mark, you'll end up with the center of the area. The forward jib is 134 square inches. The inner jib is 126 square inches. And taking the mainsail and dividing it into two triangles, I get 168 here and 132 here, a total of 300 square inches. The total of the two forward sails is 260 square inches. So there's a 40 square inch difference. The center of the two forward sails is right about here. The center of the mainsail is here. This measures about 9 inches, and from the mast to the center here is about 9 inches. So the two sections here are balancing fairly well. The center of sail effort is about where the mast is, maybe a little bit aft. And our center of lateral resistance is down here. So I am approximately where I want to be in terms of lead. So now I'm going to run you around the rig and do a few close-ups at what I did with these spars. So I'll just quickly run through what I've done with these eyes on the spars. There's one at the top of the forward end of the jib boom here. The sail will be tied to that, and the rigging will be tied to that. I've got another one pointing fore and aft. It's open a little bit because I'm going to bend it on to the eye on the forward end of the bowsprit. The lower eye here is running at right angles to the bowsprit. Jib boom turns nice and easily on this. At the after end of the forward jib boom, I have an eye pointing down, and that will be the sheet line for the jib, and another eye at the after end pointing up, and that will hold the heel of the jib sail. The inner jib boom has an eye for the toe of the jib, and the same arrangement down below with the bottom eye on the bowsprit at right angles, and it turns quite easily. I put an eye just above the waterline forward that should be able to support the end of the bowsprit in case I need it. The after end of the inner jib boom has an eye pointing up for the heel of the jib, and another eye pointing down for the sheet line. On the main mast, I have an eye in the vertical position, and on the boom, an eye in the horizontal position that is sort of bent on into place. And I have an eye pointing up here at the end for the toe of the mainsail. Further aft, I have an eye facing down, and that will be for the main sheet, and an eye facing up, which will be for the heel of the mainsail. And up top, I have an eye for the head of the sail, and another eye here that is fastened onto the gaff and up to the main mast. Here is the eye at the top of the outer jib, and here's the eye at the top of the inner jib, and there is an eye port and starboard for the main rigging stays. That could be doubled in the future so that there's 2 stays on each side, but I'll go with a single temporarily. I've marked the bowsprit at this point and I intend to cut it off there. I hope I'm not taking too much of a chance without sailing the boat, but I think that I've pretty well got the balance where I want it, so I'll cut that off. So at this stage, I'm going to double check my sails. I may have to trim a slight amount here and there in order to get the right angle and so on. But I want to be able to use the eyes in the corner so that I can tighten up the canvas and get the right set on the sails. So I'm careful to leave gaps between the sail and the eye in every location. So now I'm pretty well ready to remove the sails and remove the spars and stain or paint them. I'm not sure what I'm going to do yet. I decided to use the tan latex paint on the spars. I gave them one coat and one coat of varathane. I think that color blends in nicely for a traditional craft. I trimmed off a small amount of the mainsail here at the heel and double checked all the sails to make sure I've got the correct set on these patterns. So that brings us to the end of part 5 of the gaff cutter build. In part 6, we're going to fabricate all natural sails and continue on rigging this cutter. So don't miss that one. Thanks for watching.